in Northfield, Minnesota.
That's a really weird coincidence.
Yeah, that I would find someone out in Portland. Yeah, a college in small town Minnesota. Not even in the Twin Cities. It's like in farm country. Yeah. Sweet. Anyway, underway. Nick starts off on a basic island. Or Peter, we'll use last names. Peternell starting off on basic island and Verrall on a black-green temple.
Man, it's been just so long since I felt like last year this was my entire life, and now...
Just watching this?
Yeah, just watching Master Waves and Friends.
Well, here's a new friend. It's going to be Frostwalker. That's a 4-1. And actually, when you look at Obs on aggro, there are not a huge number of ways that you can just poke Frostwalker.
Exactly. It's, I mean, you know, you have Dromoka's Command, where it doesn't always match up the best against, but that's true of a lot of your creatures. But there aren't ways to really blow you out for playing this. If it's going to trade, it's probably with a removal spell. Yeah,
Warden of the First Tree is the play. The one danger is if Peternell has a second Frostwalker, he has to watch out because Obs on Charm can really get this guy.
Oh, yeah. The tokens.
He'll swing, block, trade it off with Warden of the First Tree, and for Peternell, it's going to be Thassa, God of the Sea.
It's just a throwback to a different time.
3 islands in Thassa. I mean, it sucks that he doesn't have a Mutavault in play. You know, you would have loved that early on. You look at that, and that's what I'm thinking. I'm saying, oh, no Mutavaults.
In case you haven't seen this card before, Thassa, God of the Sea, pretty potent. He gets to scry 1 at the beginning of every upkeep. He can make his creatures unblockable for 2 mana, and if he gets 5 total blue mana symbols into play, well, then becomes a 5/5 indestructible creature.
This card is really powerful for its mana cost. It's one of the most powerful cards in Standard, but it demands a lot.
Yep. This is a very good lesson in power level being contextual. Depending on what the surrounding cards are, Thassa can either be one of the most important cards in Standard or basically unplayed.
Now for Peternell, his hand has some things going on he doesn't really like. He plays Hypnotic Sign for the turn and passes. His hand is a Master of Waves and 2 more copies of Thassa, God of the Sea, which card's good, but in multiples, it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, Nick really just wants the 1.
Fleecemane Lion swings in, Peternell down to 17. And, well, maybe it's a weird matchup, but Obzon does what Obzon does. Tapping 4 for Siege Rhino. Sure, that's probably good in just about any situation.
Probably still good. I mean, you have no idea exactly what's going on in Nick's list here, so you're worried about counter spells, but...
That's the safety. I don't really know what's going on, but I should probably cast Siege Rhino. It's rarely bad.
Let's find out what's going on. we'll find out when we cast a Siege Rhino.
All right, a Scry to the bottom from Thassa. And Frostwalker, the draw for Peternell. That's the only card he can play, so he'll play it. And he may just have to pass. He is... The one thing I'm noticing here, the difference between this and last year's Devotion decks is it's harder to get some blue mana symbols going here. These guys only count for 1.
Well, there's also just the quality is also an issue here. Tidebinder Mage is just such an excellent card against green decks. You have 8 different 1-mana flyers.
I mean, you'd even play Frostburn Weirds, the less good blue ones. The only one you have is, I think, Mind Reaver, which that's just a 2/1 with no text. You can't really do that at blue.
It's just not the same saturation of quality threats.
Right. So Downfall takes care of the Frostwalker, and Verrall swings in for 7, puts Peternell down to 7. He's scrying here. Yeah, gonna have to figure out just what he can do.
Gonna be tough. This is also a deck, you have no copies of Rapid Hybridization, some of the other bounce spells from last year.
And not to mention, next turn, Nick Verrall can swing in and cast a rated Wingmate Rock. And I don't know of cards that... I mean, I guess Peternell could have Silumgar Sorcerer to counter, but that only keeps him alive. Yeah, he'll throw a creature in front of Fleecemane Lion. That'll take care of it. It'll go down to 3. Verrall, he'll throw a Wingmate Rock out. Sure. I believe Peternell does have Silumgar Sorcerer. It'll exploit himself to counter Wingmate Rock, but at 3 life, I don't believe Peternell has a draw.
I'd be surprised.
And that's going to be it. We're on to game 2. Nick Verrall takes the first one.
Gotta be nice to be in Nick Verrall's position there where you're not really sure what's going on. You're sort of just casting your curve of creatures and hoping that that's good enough, and then it's clearly good enough by quite a margin.
Yeah, so pretty good one there. All right, I have to imagine a blue Devotion deck is going to have some sideboard for this kind of matchup. And starting out, we have 4 copies of Encase in Ice. That seems fantastic against Obzon.
2 copies of Wall of Frost. 3
That's
copies
great.
of Sidisi's Faithful, 2 Negate, 2 Disable Stroke, 2 Aether Spouts. I think Wall of Frost and Encase in Ice are both great cards to bring in this matchup. Wall of Frost is double blue, so good for devotion. It's not easy for Nick Verrall's deck to attack through. It only calls one creature, but it's still a very good starting point. And 4 copies of Encase in Ice seem great against Nick's, various green creatures.
Yeah, that seems like an excellent start for the match. Sidisi's Faithful, that's interesting. I assume it's just mostly for red decks. It's your Kraken Hatchling, but it's better than Kraken Hatchling because you can do something else.
Yeah, I think it's probably part of a package against mono red along with Encase in Ice and Wall of Frost to just slow the game down a little bit.
Yeah, I guess the wonder is if you still would use it here. Probably not.
Probably not. A card I'm curious by its absence in this blue devotion deck is Omen Speaker. That seems like a really nice addition. Now, I guess he's trying to tilt a little bit more aggressively with Frostwalker, but Omen Speaker is the same amount of devotion. It's a really quality blocker in a lot of matchups and helps you just get you land drops 3 and 4 or find your Thassa and Master Race where your payoff is.
Yeah, when you looked at some of the really early builds of mono blue devotion almost 2 years ago, you saw some Omen Speakers. Sometimes you saw Vaporkin as possible 2-drops. The cards he's gone for are Hypnotic Siren, Frostwalker, Kiora's Follower, and Stratus Dancer. So Stratus Dancer seems like a definite improvement to Vaporkin. Sure.
For sure.
Same thing.
That is a card you're going to cast on turn 2 and also be happy to morph.
Right.
So that seems like a pretty easy
Vaporkin
card.
had the upside that it's an elemental, so Master of Waves pumps it sometime. But
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that was sweet. But the upside of Stratus Dancer is probably higher than you could morph it.
I would say so.
But all right, on Verrall's side, what do we have?
2 Den Protector, 2 Ultimate Price, a Duress, a Sorin Solemn Visitor, 4 copies of Thoughtseize, 2 Drown in Sorrow, 2 Elspeth Sun's Champion, 1 Nissa Worldwaker. Really like Ultimate Price and Drown in Sorrow in this matchup, and I think the 1 copy of Sorin is pretty good here as well.
Yeah, Sorin actually does seem really good with that life gain, could definitely pull him ahead. Yeah, so we talked earlier about we now have the rest of the year's tournaments all planned out. So if you're looking at how you can play in one of our Star City Games Opens, we walked through what our summer events are. Now we're going to go through our autumn and winter events. This is the last quarter. So this builds up toward the Season 4 Invitational, which is going to be in the Northwest as well. So we start out with the Modern Open Series in Cincinnati at the beginning of December. So we do have some Modern Opens. Then we start to make our way toward the middle of the country with Worcester, Milwaukee, and Indianapolis.
Yeah, after in Indianapolis, we're going to head to Standard Open Series in Atlanta. 2 weeks after that, Legacy in St. Louis. Back to Dallas for a Modern Open Series event. Then back to Philadelphia for Standard Open Series, November 7th and 8th. After that, we go to Grand Prix Atlanta, which is a sealed Grand Prix, November 13th through 15th. A Legacy Open New Jersey and a Legacy Open in New Jersey to close out November. Then we go to Denver for the first time in several years for Standard Open Series. The Season 4 Invitational in Seattle, which will be standard and modern as the Invitational formats, and a Standard Open Series event. And then after that, the Players Championship, Roanoke, Virginia, December 19th and 20th.
All right, building up toward the end of the year. So if you are looking to make it toward the Players' Championship or just come and compete at a higher level, the whole schedule is posted at StarCityGames.com. We go to Game 2. Peternell on the play. He was down Game 1 there. Had a triple Thassa hand. Not really what you want to see.
You want the 1.
You really want the 1.
You definitely want the 1 on turn 3.
You want it enough that you'll keep hands with 2 Thassas in them because, sure, at least you have 1. 3's a lot. Players trading some land. So for Peternell, it's just a pair of islands to start the game, nothing early. Interested to see maybe he's gone with a more reactive board plan.
Well, his deck can play a much slower game if he wants to post-board with Wall of Frost and Case Nice, even Aether Spouts if he wants it, Disdainful Stroke. He can, we've seen blue devotion decks do this before where they convert into much more of a control deck, get away from some of the early flyers and such, and just kind of play that sort of game plan.
And I think probably he can keep something without a 1 or 2 drop based on the strength of the deck. The hand had 3 islands and Thassa. If you look at your first 4 cards in most of these decks, and it's island, Thassa, you can almost keep it at that point.
There's very few decks in Standard that have a card that's so powerful in their strategy that you're keeping dodgy hands because it contains that card. And Thassa's on that list.
It's Thassa, yeah, certainly. It is the best card in the deck by a large margin. So, and he has it. Verrall will make Anafenza the foremost. Pretty aggressive creature. But these 3-drop green creatures without much utility, those are the kind of cards that I would hope a blue devotion deck would be well positioned against.
Especially with Peternell having access to Encase in Ice post board. And he now has more insurance against Dromoka's command, too, because he's going to start to insulate a little bit. He's going to have expendable enchantments to sacrifice. Of course, he would prefer to keep Anafenza locked down, but if this whole thing revolves around Thassa, which it stands to reason it does, he gets a little bit more protection there.
Now, one thing I do want to note, he's going to encase and ice the Anafenza here. Now, if he wanted to make this play, I do think he should have done it main phase in case Nick Verrall had a copy of Dromoka's command or drew it.
Yeah.
Because then Nick could do that in response and snag the Thassa. You see Peternell, that turn off the scry, did not get a land drop. So for Verrall, it'll be Rakshasa Death Dealer. And here's Abzan aggro at its finest, casting Death Dealer, leaving up Plains Caves of Koilos. that guy.
You like the Death Dealer white sources of mana deck?
Oh boy, look, he's got another Plains in his hand too.
We call that the cost of doing business. That's just what this deck does.
No, I mean, I get you have to do it. It's just,
No, trust me, I'm sympathetic. It's hard to watch, but this is how this deck works.
Yeah, what's interesting with Peternell's build here, you see as he plays Thornwood Falls, his green source, is he's playing green for Collected Company. I think in the typical net deck variations of this deck, you'll see them stay mono blue and play a card like Bident of Thassa, which is a really similar card in that they're both card advantage. And you see Peternell just freezing everything. There's Tomb of Ice, expands from Anafenza and makes its way over to Rakshasa Death Dealer.
And this is not great news for Verrall. I mean, his hand's powerful, but it's a lot of reactive cards, which is not necessarily what you want against Thassa. And a Wingmate Rock that he can't raid right now because all of his creatures are locked down.
Yeah, he opted not to cast Wingmate there, which he could have. He has Drown in Sorrow, Wingmate Rock, and you see Shore Crasher Elemental, cast from Peternell. And here's your blue symbol card.
This was supposed to be the card that, if Blue Devotion could be put back on the map, this was the card that was supposed to do it. It's a reasonable deal for 3 mana. It's a lot of devotion.
Yeah, it's a lot of devotion. Now, one of the issues, which I've heard from people who pilot this deck, is that the card's just not that good. It's fine. It's a 3/3 for 3, and it protects itself, and it can kind of pump. But it's a lot of blue mana symbols, and that's the good part.
In a game like this, it's likely this card's going to be powerful because Verrall's game plan right now is just removal, removal, removal. And this is not the easiest card to fight with removal.
And remember that because of those encase and ices, this does activate Thassa. And Peternell may be able to crash in for 5.
I mean, if Nick Verrall wants to go ahead and use a downfall on this and then untap and Drown in Sorrow the leftovers, that's quite a bit of response for just one card.
But he may have to do it. We'll see if he does. Thassa, not joking around when it comes to attacking. Yeah, he'll Hero's Downfall the Elemental. Oh, he's Hero's Downing his own Rakshasa Death Dealer.
Well, Nick Peternell still has, that's 5 mana symbols in play.
Yeah, that's still 5. And Verrall, now I think he knows it. Said, oh, and that was...
I think this is a huge issue for a number of reasons now. I think that Nick Verrall's plan to get out from under this was to downfall, untap, and Drown in Sorrow, and now he can't do that.
No, and that, yeah, you can see it on his face. He miscalculated there. Cast Wingmate Rock, no raid. And that's fine. Peternell can race this. Remember, Thassa can make cards unblockable. He'll scry.
Oh, Thassa and friends, they really shine in games like this.
Yeah. The scary thing is that they clean up in a hurry. Yeah. I mean, Thassa's 5 power unblockable on her own. Here's a flashback, if I've ever seen one. Master of Waves is the play. And by the way, Shore Crasher, his second name is Shore Crasher Elemental, which...
Combo.
There we go. It can swing through Wingmate Rock now. It's a 4/4.
Having some flashbacks here.
5 0-1s. No, 6 in case and ice. 6 0-1s into play, or 1-0s into play. They're all 2-1s. Wingmate jumps in front of Shore Crasher. I think Nick missed the interaction. Nope, it's an Elemental. It's going to kill Wingmate Rock.
Yep.
It's okay. You know, actually, if you're going to take a time to learn that interaction and pay for it, this is a great game to do it.
Listen. If I was Nick Verrall, same thing would have happened to me. I would have made that same block.
I said, it's an Elemental. You're like, yeah, okay, sure,
yeah,
whatever.
I would have put my Wingmate Rod directly into the graveyard.
Well, okay, but now you know. Now you're not going to make that mistake during the game that you can actually win, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't have Kill Spell for Master Waves, cards was 14 power for 4 mana.
And now, you know, Nick can go ahead and... Nick Verrall can go ahead and drown, but that's not much of a help here.
Do you even want to show Peternell that you have Drown in Sorrow in your deck? No. I don't think so.
Another interesting thing there is Nick Verrall is going to go and downfall his own creature in that spot to reduce the devotion count. It needs to be the Anafenza, because then the Drown in Sorrow takes care of his own Death Dealer, and he reduces a lot of devotion that way.
Yeah, I mean, if the Shore Crash Elemental was flipped over, that line can work.
No, I think Nick Verrall got just a little too fancy in that game. He had a pretty clean line there of downfall your Shore Crash Elemental, untap and Drown in Sorrow. I still think Nick Peternell is a huge favorite in that game because he's got Thassa against no board. He's got a lot of cards in his hand. I'm not saying that Nick Verrall suddenly turns around and wins that game.
Then Verrall uses Drown in Sorrow, and Peternell then gets to cast Master after the Drown in Sorrow.
Right. It's going to be really hard there, I think, for Verrall to win it under any circumstances. But I think he got a little too fancy there.
Yeah. Well, he does have a game to redeem himself. And this is something when you play against, this is a matchup that you really haven't practiced against cards that you haven't played against, is there's a little bit of a cost of education going on, you know? Especially a deck that's as aggressive as something like Blue-Green Devotion, your missteps are going to get punished very hard. It's not like playing against a rogue control deck where you can feel it out as you go. This is a rogue deck that just starts clocking you.
Thassa's still punishing the mistakes too, because you can't recover with blockers. There's no recovery with creatures of any sort. Because you can't block. So
you can't kill it, you can't block. Once it's on, if you screw up, it's gonna kill you.
We saw that a lot last year as well. When you messed up against Blue Devotion and their rapid hybridization tagged you at the wrong moment, or you got hit by a counterspell that maybe you could avoid, there was no catching up. The deck killed you in a way that was very hard to interact with in a very short time frame. But there are some lessons learned there. And I think that even with perfect play there from Nick Verrall, I think he's going to be in trouble in that second game. Yeah. So as you mentioned, if you're going to pay the price for education, might as well be in a game where it's hopeless, even if you're playing perfect.
But it does show off the game plan of Peternell, which is he's a control deck for a few turns early. You know, one time you can kind of talk about decks in theory about at what point do I stop looking at my own life total and do I start looking at yours? You know, for control decks, the answer is never. You always just, you only record your own life total.
It's arbitrary.
It's arbitrary.
You win when you win. It doesn't really matter what their life total is.
But for Nick, it's interesting because I think for like the few, it's really quick actually. He's looking at his own life total for about turns 1 through 3, maybe 4, and then he just switches. Now he's looking at his opponent's life total.
I mean, Peternell's curve that game was Encase in Ice, Thassa, Encase in Ice, and then suddenly flip the script and I'm attacking you, making things difficult to block. And
I'm attacking you, and not for little amounts either. I'm attacking you for huge chunks.
Right. But I love the lessons that cards like Thassa can teach, because I think a lot of people view Magic cards through the prism of what's powerful and what's not.
Yeah,
and often things are more complicated than that. How good are the warrior enablers, let's say in Khans of Tarkir block? They're sort of only as good as the warriors that surround them. And the warriors are good, but not great, probably. Mm-hmm. And that's the power level what those enablers appear to be. Depending on the quality and how many warriors there are, the Chief of the Scale and Chief of the Edge can be anywhere from unplayable to defining parts of Standard.
Especially Chief of the Edge. That card is, I mean, if you want to just talk in a vacuum, how aggressively costed is the raw strength of this card. So like, in the right deck, Chief of the Edge is a very powerful card.
And Thassa is much the same story. Now, Thassa's raw power level is much higher, in my opinion, than those Warriors cards, but it's the same lesson. How many quality, cheap blue creatures, ideally flushed with a lot of blue mana symbols, are there floating around in the format? Last year, there was a lot of them, and Thassa was one of the defining cards of Standard. This year, there's way fewer of them, and Thassa's mostly been relegated to the sidelines. Has seen very little play. So, power level, it's a contextual thing. There's some cards that kind of show up no matter what. No matter what Standard looks like, Thoughtseizes is probably showing up in decks. Very
Heroes
high raw
Downfall.
Heroes Downfall. There's some cards like that, but for the most part, it's context-driven. And Thassa's very contextual.
Yeah. It's interesting about, when I say what are the best standalone cards, I'll say Ojutai, he'd probably be around in almost every Standard format he'd see play. Dig Through Time.
How good is Slumgar Scorn? Well, that is really tied to the quality of dragons. You cannot separate the two things. And Thassa is the same story.
Exactly. There exist metagames where Spear of Heliod is a really powerful card. This isn't one of them.
I played Spear of Heliod a lot last year and thought it was a pretty solid card.
There's a lot of really great cards that aren't seeing any play.
I mean, you go back to look at standards last season where cards like Desecration Demon and Pack Rat were largely ignored when Ravnica came out. And again, we're defining cards by the end of standard season just because of the nature of the removal spells and some other things going on. That's just how that works. I mean, you cannot separate cards from the formats they exist in.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Pack Rat really took a year to take off. Peternell on 6, Verrall on 7.
But it
Both
looks
players
like,
start on temples.
Looks like Nick Peternell has found a copy of Thassa, so I think he'll take a 6-card hand if he can make his land drops and get to Thassa on turn 3.
He would keep a 1-land temple hand with Thassa, probably. Thassa is the deck. I mean, you can play it without Thassa, but
I would not want to.
Yeah. The hands without Thassa are way more fair than the other ones. First play from Verrall is going to be Anafenza the Foremost. Peternell was not, because of his both lands were temples, he was not able to encase an Ice it on end step or make any plays. He can make his own Thassa here, but it'll cost him some life points. He'll get reasonably behind. He may do it anyway, and Thassa is just kind of his deck.
But there's also the issue of falling behind to Dromoka's command as well.
Right. Yep. Turn 3 Thassa. Had it all. That's been his play all 3 games.
Nick Verrall going untap, hit you, play Siege Rhino is pretty bad for Peternell, but going Dromoka's command and maybe a follow-up play is even worse. And that's the big risk here.
Command Fleece Mane Lion. Well, he's got an Airback Command Death Dealer. How's an Airgro's mana so specific? He's going to Dromoka's command. Counter on Anafenza, sack the Thassa. Has a 5/5, bashes in for 5. Does he have the follow-up Death Dealer here? That'd be pretty big.
That's
he does not.
Still a great turn for Verrall.
I mean, the moral of the story is Nick Peternell didn't get Thassa, and any turn that ends with that has to be pretty decent. Peternell does have a backup Thassa in his hand. I don't know if he can, but how many 5s can he take? He has Collected Company, Encase in Ice, Silumgar. It looks like Silumgar Sorcerer.
With Collected Company, I sort of like passing the turn here. There's an opportunity for Verrall to mess up, and if he assumes Peternell's on counterspells, he may play nothing at all, or something very small to add to the board, and then Collected Company might catch Peternell all the way up.
So Collected Company is a really interesting card. By and large, when I've talked about the card, I've walked people through the math of it, and having mathed it out, the card is pretty bad. I think it gets played incorrect. Like, the number of creatures you need to play to make this card actually good is really high.
What's your number?
I want to be on 27.
Well,
this passes.
Peternell's at 32.
Right. This is the only decks in Standard that I've seen play it where I'm like, you know what? I'm down for this. Sure. So he Encase in Ice has the Anafenza. Verrall plays a Warden of the First Tree, plays another Anafenza, and Legend rules the Frozen one. Yeah, I want 27, but yeah, 32 is really high. You've seen like some Obzon Company decks, and you know it's like, hey, you better not be playing any Heroes Downfalls.
Right.
Or no, but this is a deck where I really like it. So swing from Verrall. Puts a 1/1 counter on the Warden. And it's pretty sweet that you can company into Thassa.
Yeah, that's a nice. That on its own may be worth the splash.
Yeah, you can, and you have a creature that's a counter spell as well. That's cool.
Yeah, if Verrall gets a little sloppy there and tries to tap out for something large, Collected Company could yield a counterspell creature, and that's great too.
Yeah. So he's debating if he wants to take the Thassa. He may have to take it even though he has a Thassa in his hand. Thing about companies, you usually don't get many options. He gets Thassa. Does he have a second creature? Yes, he has the counter spell as well. He has Silumgar Sorcerer. Nothing to counter right now, so he'll go with Frostwalker. I like that quite a bit.
Frostwalker's not shabby here. It's a blocker.
Yeah, can take care of either of these guys. If Verrall lets it happen, which I don't think he will, he can downfall the Walker and pump the Warden, and that's just a lot of damage. It's going to be 8.
And you just have to assume that Peternell's deck is not great at playing catch-up from this spot. There's not a lot of good bounce spells floating around the format, and he hasn't, besides the Encase in Ice, he really hasn't shown the capacity to stop the momentum for Verrall once it starts happening.
Yeah, I think Nick should put a 3 there and then a 1/1 counter on it. It's a 4/4, he's not wrong, but it's trickier because it's a 3/3 with a 1/1 counter. Yeah. It is a 3/3. It has a 1/1 counter. There we go. Got there. Peternell down to 7.
See, easy. Got it fixed.
So one of the a lot of times when you talk about how well can a deck catch up, I feel like a deck's ability to catch up is really proportional to how much removal's in it. It's really hard to catch up without removal, and Peternell has some, but not a lot.
Just any sort of way to break serve in some permanent sense. Wall of Frost would have been really solid
Right.
here on a couple of the turns.
That was my thought too. Wall of Frost would be great.
But Peternell just hasn't found it.
Well, if he could pull off a turn like Wall of Frost and Case and Ice here, that'd be just great.
Because as we mentioned before, it doesn't take a long time for this Devotion deck to go from defense to offense, especially when Thassa gets turned on. When there's 5 blue mana symbols in play, you have a 5/5 unblockable creature. It doesn't take a lot past that to really end the game quite quickly.
Well, Wall of Frost could hold off both these attackers, actually. I mean, Warden, eventually it wouldn't, but you have time.
It's a slow, you have time to find a Case Nice.
To find Hypnotic Siren, you could take it.
Oh, yeah. Forgot.
Yeah.
That's even better.
It's not just a one more, not just Flying Men.
That's
better.
even better.
Let's see what he's got. Looks like he's in a hard cast, a Stratus Dancer. Believe he's hanging on to a Silumgar Sorcerer in hand. This is good, and I mean, it's good that he has cards he can cast, but his creatures are just a little small.
Yeah.
It's facing down lethal.
That's the problem here is Verrall can just move into combat, and Peternell needs to do something.
Yeah.
You don't want to be in the spot where your opponent is alpha striking for lethal, and you have to react to what they're doing. You want them to have to try to push a little bit more on the table to represent lethal, and then you can respond. But
I'm assuming he chumps one of them, then throws down the Sorcerer, and then tries to draw into some more blue mana symbols. Maybe if he then top decks Wall of Frost, now he's alive again.
yeah, something like that. I mean, he's going to need some perfect draws here.
Blocks Anafenza because the Warden could get trample. Has to block Anafenza. Takes 5, goes to 2. Verrall plays a Temple and passes. Plays Wingmate Rock rated. That you have to counter that with Sorcerer. That can't happen.
Yeah, and I think that Peternell may have thrown a little trap there by blocking an Anafenza. He's saying, I can answer the Warden somehow.
Well,
Verrall made no play.
You mean instead of blocking Warden?
Yeah.
Well, he could have given Warden trample with 4 mana, and that would kill him.
No, that's my point is by...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's representing some sort of answer as it stands there, Peternell with nothing to do, and that's going to do it.
So Blue-Green Devotion does pick up its second loss, but Nick Peternell, 2 rounds to go. He just needs 1 more win to make day 2.
A good showing there from Obs on aggro. I do like a lot of what's going on with Peternell's list. It does not play catch-up very well.